Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a review. This one is for Ishtar, designed by Bruno Catala and Evan Singh. It's published by Iello. This is a 2 to 4 player tile placement game that we were lucky enough to get our hands on before Gen Con. It is hitting at Gen Con, and we've already had a chance to play it a number of times.
Yeah, this is a fantastic game all about area control in the Gardens of Babylon. You have a number of regions in the game equal to the number of players plus 2. These regions are going to be populated at the start of the game with a number of gems, which are already predestined by the printing on the actual boards themselves, and a number of fountains that are randomly placed. These are all have different colors as well that can give points. Also, you're going to have tablets that are on them, and these are important for some of the scoring. You're going to have this magic carpet over the side, which is basically runs the game. It's a rondel that you're going to be moving around and collecting vegetation tiles in order to place them onto the board. To start the game, it's actually very simple. On your turn, starting with the first player, he's going to be able to place this watering can on any one of these vegetation tiles. These tiles come in a variety of different things, but on your turn, you actually get to pick one of these according to some rules that are built into the game.
Yeah, exactly. On a natural turn, you're just going to move it to the very next space and take that tile, flipping over the last tile that the watering can was on. However, you're going to start with one gem, and you're going to be collecting gems, obviously, throughout the game through tile placement. You can spend those gems to actually move a little further around this rondel to get that one tile you're looking for, because these tiles have a variety of different things on them, powers and whatnot, that you're going to want to trigger right at the right time.
When you collect one of these tiles, you're going to immediately place that tile into your hand. You're going to leave the watering can on that location and flip it over just as David already alluded to, and then you get to place this tile somewhere on the board. Now, there are rules on how you place these as well. Rule number 1, it has to go adjacent to a fountain at the start of the game because there's nowhere else to place it. Anytime you place it adjacent, you're going to collect whatever is underneath of it. So you're going to be collecting gems. However, you can never place them over top of any of these sacred tablets that you see. Rule number 2, you could also place it adjacent to any other tile that's already on the board, as long as it does not connect one garden region that's connected to a fountain to another garden region that's connected to another fountain. So when you look at this, I cannot connect these two pieces together because it's connecting this fountain all the way to this fountain, and you have to leave gaps in between them. That's an important rule, and it's very important for blocking other players out from scoring.
Yeah, that becomes an incredibly strategic aspect of this game, but it is one of those pesky rules you have to deal with. You can also not build flower beds, and the flower beds are these regions here that have the greenery and, of course, the flowers. You can't build those such that you're going to have any two assistants in the flower beds. We'll get to this in a second, but these assistants are going to come out from all the players into the flower beds. There can be never two assistants, whether they're the same color or not, in the same flower bed. So this is yet another strategic thing that you have to work around as you place these tiles.
Several of these tiles are going to have icons on them. These are special abilities that you get to also take on your turn. There is the star, which is basically allowing you to spend some of your gems to gain a skill. We'll come back to that one. And then there is the actual assistant. This is pre-built onto the tiles. This allows you to take one of the assistants off of your player board, which you'll start with 2, and then place it exactly on this tile over top of that icon. That assistant is then going to have control of that flower bed and any of the other flower beds that he's attached to. The other icon is the question mark. This allows you to do either or, either the skill or the placing of the assistant. Now let's come back to that skill, because having these skills is incredibly important.
Yeah, everyone's going to start with a player board in front of them, of course, and the main thing you've got going on here is a place to store your gems, of course, right here, but also these skills across the top. Down here, it's going to remind you what you need to do when you use one of those skill icons. You're going to spend 2 gems that you have in your supply on any one of these skills right here. You have to start with the level 1 skills and then move up to the level 2. Now, you don't have to fill in all of the level 1s before you do the level 2s, but if you just unlock the one beneath it, you can do the one above it. All the ones at the bottom are going to be one-time abilities where you're able to reserve a tile, reserve a card, maybe trade in some gems for different colors. The top ones are all about end-of-game scoring that is not built into the game naturally.
Exactly. The final thing that you can do on your turn, if you choose to do so, is to expend any of the gems that you have on your player board in order to buy one of the trees. The trees are cards and components together. Each of the trees has a natural number of gems that is required in order to build that. So say, for instance, I had 5 white gems. I could expend those back to the supply in order to collect this card. When you collect the card, you're just going to put it onto your side of the table, and that's worth an X number of victory points at the end of the game. What you also get to do is you get to take the tree off the top of that card and then place it on any of the grasslands anywhere on the board. Now, strategically, this has two purposes within the game. One is one of the skills that you can unlock is going to give you 2 points for every flower garden attached to it where you have an assistant. That's really important. But the other important thing that may not be so subtle the first time you play it, it's a great blocking mechanism for people extending their flower beds out.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me at least 3 plays before I realized you could use these trees. If you're not going to unlock that skill to score points with them, you could use it to stifle other players from building larger flower beds, because you want to build larger flower beds because scoring points for each and every one of the flowers, those yellow flowers in those flower beds, is a huge part of scoring.
And people are just going to keep taking their turns one after another, moving this in a circular clockwise pattern around the board until 2 of these stacks are completely depleted. When that happens, each player is going to have one final turn, so it ends with the last player in the game. Then you're going to count up points. Points are scored in a variety of ways. Number 1 is all the tree cards that you have. You're simply going to add those up and record it onto the player sheet itself. The second thing is you're going to look at that player board that you have. Any of the level 2 skills across the top where you have 2 gems that you've unlocked, you're going to get points for those, and those come in a wide variety of different things.
Yeah, the different skills that you can unlock at the top, again, these are things that you're going to specialize in. For instance, like I said earlier, you could score 2 points for every tree that is adjacent to at least one of your flower gardens. There's another one, in fact, that allows you to get 7 points for every assistant that you've collected that you have not put out into the Gardens of Babylon. So it may be counterintuitive to the other aspects of scoring, but getting 7 points for each of these guys could add up to maybe 21, even 28 points if you want to play a really strange strategy.
Yeah, in fact, there's one of the skills up there too that give you points for the gems that you have left over. Natively, gems on your player board aren't worth anything, but one of those spots allows you to get 3, 2, or 1 points for the different colored gems. Now, there's 2 other ways that you can score that are just as important. One is the assistants that are in flower beds. So at the end of the game, if this assistant was in this flower bed, he's going to get 1 point for every single one of the flowers in that flower bed. And you're going to simply count those up and record them. It's a lot of points you can score if you have large flower beds. The other way is having a garden that is in control of one of the fountains there.
Yeah, each fountain, as we said earlier, is going to have 1 garden attached to it. Gardens cannot touch each other or connect multiple fountains. So you're going to look at 1 garden around 1 fountain and see who has the biggest flower bed. This has nothing to do with the yellow flowers, but simply the little round areas that comprise the flower beds. I'm going to count up here and see that someone has something like 7 or 8. If someone else has a flower bed in that same garden that's maybe 6, they're both competing for the points there. The guy who has the most is going to get the points for that fountain. The purple fountains are worth 4, the red fountains are worth 6, and the white fountain, and there's only one of those, is worth 8.
That's the game. You're going to tally up the points. Person with the most points wins. So, number 1, you're probably one of the biggest, outside maybe Dan King, one of the biggest Ishtar or biggest Bruno Catala fans that I know. When we wanted this game for a while,
yeah.
And the first time that we saw this at Origins, I was just kind of ho-hum. It looks okay. It doesn't have anything special to it. But once we've played the game, there is a ton of nuance in this game that you don't realize the first couple times that you play it. There's times when you just want to hoard a bunch of gems, and you can score points for those. There's other times when you want to build massive flower gardens, and you can do that as well. And it's not just your decisions, but you're watching what the other players are doing. There's not direct conflict in the game, but there's a lot of indirect conflict by using certain components in certain areas and blocking people from expanding too big or trying to keep people condensed in a certain area. So I love that part of the game.
Yeah, you can. The strategy here is where that conflict comes into play. Like Jeremy said, it's subtle because you're not really doing things that are very directly mean to another player. However, if Jeremy's building a big garden here stretching out, one of the things I could do is use these 2 gardens to sort of stretch out in that direction. And if I just go out really far with just a long piece or 2 long pieces, I'm able to create a situation where he can't build out any further in that direction because of those rules about the gardens not touching one another. So I'm able to keep him from getting gems that way. I'm also able to keep him from growing a much bigger garden. Potentially he might have a big garden like that, and we're both competing for the same tower. I might be able to stifle him on one side while I grow my other. And of course, that will elicit maybe a reaction from Jeremy, and he might do the same. So there's a little bit of a chess match or like almost an abstract strategy game like that thing going on, especially at 2 players.
Yeah, and it becomes increasingly more important to figure out what your opponent is trying to do and trying to stifle them. Plus, there's a lot of ways to score. If you are stifled within the game from trying to do one strategy, there's always opportunity to do something else, because there's a lot of ways to score. I wouldn't consider this a massive point salad game, but there's a variety of different things that we can score for. You have your trees that you can score for. You have your flower gardens. You have your gyms that you could possibly score for. All of these top areas are lines of direct point scoring that you can tailor yourself. So the game doesn't have any natural built-in ways outside of the fountains and the flower gardens. It's really up to you as a player to determine the things you want to score for in the game.
Exactly, and that comes down to the player board. Aside from the player board, there's obviously those 2 main ways of scoring. And I haven't played it enough to say this for sure, but there's even some ability to ignore some of those normal ways of scoring and really go heavy on some of the scoring on your player board and still be competitive. I've seen plenty of games where everyone is scoring their points in vastly different ways. I've seen one where someone went with this gem ability right off the bat and was able to convert some of their gems from using this ability to purple gems, because purple gems in this case are worth 3. So they just spent their game collecting as many gems as possible, not really caring too much about what was going on all over the board, but they did have one assistant out there in one garden and competed there.
Yeah.
So as long as they were able to build one big garden there, get a bunch of flower points and potentially the points from that fountain, they were able to supplement that with a lot of points from their player board.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say about this game too is that on the surface, it looks incredibly simple, and it is simple to play. It's super approachable. A lot of people can play this game from ages probably, I don't know what the ages say on the side.
It says 14.
There's no way. People who are 7, 8 years old could easily grasp this game. However, it does become checkers and chess the less players you have. We played a 2-player game just against us just to see what that felt like. And I loved the experience because it was a chess match. It was trying to figure out what you're doing and how I can stifle you but also get points from it. And I love that because it doesn't naturally look like a game that has a lot of meat to it, but it does.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And even in a 3- and 4-player game, you're going to be thinking that same way, but you'll see other players around the table doing things that you're happy that they did, because it's also stifling the player that you're wanting to try to stifle at that same point. There's a lot of things that this game offers, and what I'll say in general, like a lot of Bruno games, this is medium to light, actually, weight game with a ton of thinkiness to it.
Yeah.
You really, every time I've played this, someone's like, I'm going to, actually, no, I'll take, hold on. They're really thinking about their turn, and you can have a turn where you place just the right tile, because if you didn't know it, there's a perfect tile here sitting here almost every time that you can use to really maximize your turn. And when you do that, it's really satisfying.
I don't have a whole lot of negatives to say. I do think this is a game that can be expanded. I think one good expansion where you can maybe get a 3rd skill just gives people that opportunity to do something different. Because maybe after a half dozen or so plays, you're going to understand, like I said, the nuances within the game and how to score points. I think with an expansion, by adding maybe different colored trees that could score a little bit differently, different types of tiles that could come into play that may change how you would typically play the game, would make it just maybe a little bit more interesting. But as it sits, I find the game really enjoyable.
Yeah, I would list that same con as almost a pro, because now I'm salivating over the idea of all of those potentials. Like, imagine trees that had an impact on the board state themselves, a special tree that then everyone wanted to grow around, things like that. So hopefully the game does well enough to support those sorts of things, because we're definitely hungry for it.
Ishtar coming out at Gen Con. I would definitely go pick this one up. If you have any questions, make them in comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and everything else that we do. And we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.